Okay, people, we're sitting here continuing our little discussion for the sake of sentient beings, of course. What else? So any questions from your thinking over lunchtime? Any questions whatsoever? Ask, otherwise we'll continue with the death process.
I had one. We were discussing it a little bit. I got some insights from the others.
Mm-hmm.
I have a serious issue with aversion, and I started feeling very almost nauseous over it because I have an aversion to attachment from PTSD and really bad experiences to where I wouldn't say afraid, I'd say disgusted with getting attached, especially. I think the real serious issue that I'm having with it is it has to do with the community. I have an aversion to being attached to community because of the way I've been treated by community.
Okay, I'm a bit confused what you're saying. So sorry, darling. What do you mean you have aversion to attachment to community? So what's it? So say it again.
I've been every time I've tried to get involved with the community, specifically at church, it's been a very bad situation.
Okay.
What it's come down to is I'm trying to find the boundary between unattachment and aversion so I can basically have a sangha without feeling like I'm going to have the same bad experiences as happened with church.
Yeah, I hear you, but all you can do is try and have integrity. All you can do is work on your mind. All you can do is look at your own delusions. All you can do is try to develop yourself, find a community that suits you, that teaches and practices what you want to practice, and see where it takes you with some confidence and not be too caught up in concepts and ideas about the past. That's all we can do, I think. That's all I can say to you. Try and just take it one step at a time, be very humble, very just normal. Look at our attachment to being liked and approved of, and then the problems when it arises. I mean, all this stuff, this is what practice is, and we can never guarantee we don't have negative karma with a group. You can't guarantee that you won't get, attacked by somebody tomorrow because we're not clairvoyant. So all we can do is practice every day and do our best and have integrity, practice good ethics, and go one step at a time. I mean, it's a very broad answer, but I think it's the only answer I can give you.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
Thank you, darling. Who else has any questions from anybody in particular? Any questions to say? We'll carry on. Nothing there, Anna?
Nothing in the chat, Venerable.
Okay. So basically basically now, at this point, I mean, this is in Rinpoche's book, the first part is like background about karma and all the different things and just the general approach. There's 5 parts to the book. Part 1, part 2, part 3 is different. And then the main part, the last part is really 2/3 of the book, which is all the 87 different practices, all numbered. There are lots of mantras, lots of prayers, lots of sutras to recite, lots of purification, lots of meditations, lots of different individual practices. And the only way to collect them all and make them coherent, because there's so many things Rinpoche recommends, you put them, they're all in order. And then throughout the advice, it says practice 17. So you go to practice 17 and then you do it, So, I mean, there's all kinds of things. And of course, because the book is chronological, so what to do in the weeks and months before the person dies is when they're sick and they're, so then it's then lots of different practices are, for example, it will say then medicine Buddha in this particular case. But then again, when it gets to the next section, what to do in the last weeks before the person dies, it'll also say medicine Buddha. So it'll say it several times. It'll advise the different practices in different scenarios. And then the practice is mentioned once at the back. So that's how you use the book, how you navigate the book, So the weeks and months before is for, let's say, a person who's kind of sick, old, or obviously what we call dying. So then before we go further into the death process, I'm going to go back a bit, okay? So there's various things that's so important to be aware of. So in other words, Rinpoche really stresses that, in a situation like that, where it's not where the person just dies overnight, but they're in your care or you're one of the people caring, then for example, the most practical thing would be to have their room be really beautiful. What to do, I mean, to make it really nice. I mean, unfortunately, one of the problems with sick rooms, we have a person in a sick room, it's usually messy and dark and cluttered with things. And then you think about a person's mind, any of us, we're very sensitive to the external environment. It's the mind is the point. But if you're sick and you're gradually getting older and weaker, also what's happening is your mind is getting more sensitive, So to be in a room that's dark and dingy, or this is the unfortunate thing about hospitals, although doctors and nurses are so kind, you can almost argue that the worst place to die is a hospital. Because, you know, even if you've got a private, if you're rich and got a private room, then that's about the best. That's fine. But most people in wards, I mean, I visited a place recently in New York, a very nice hospital. There were 2 people in the room, and the bed of my friend was half poking out the door. The doors are open. There's clanking and people and moaning and other people's. I mean, it's incredibly awful scenario to be sick and dying in, you know, because your mind, it becomes so sensitive. And as Lama Zopa says, even you're so sensitive to even the tiniest noise can be so distressing for the person's mind. So the thing to really understand is to have the most best environment possible. And this includes for your pussycat and for your dog and for your bird. Put them in a safe, quiet place where they don't feel threatened, you know, where there's no noises and loud. And this is one of the most important things. You know, it's like, in other words, Rinpoche says, have the room be very beautiful. And you think about it, you see, one of the sections of Rinpoche's books, all the practices, they're divided into what to see, what to hear, what to touch. The senses are very powerful, and they can all be doorways into the mind, and they can all be utilized for the benefit of the sick and dying person. It's really important. So for your loved one, like for your mum or your grandma or whatever, your husband, who knows, a baby, you have it beautiful. You have it, and everything, and of course, from the Buddhist perspective, everything in that room is there for the benefit of the sick person, not for you. So like a friend of mine who's sick and dying for over a while, she can't hardly ever sit up. So in her bed, and the wall facing is all these pictures of her lamas and the Buddha. So when she opens her eyes, she sees them. When she hears something, she hears the sounds of the mantras. She sees the picture of the Buddha. So it was like my Catholic mum. You'd find out what she liked, and you put those images there. So every time she opens her eyes, half asleep, it leaves an impression in her mind. It leaves an imprint in her mind. And this is the key thing to understand about karma. You know, in our world, we just think, oh, yeah, make the room nice. That's lovely. Very nice. Yeah, yeah. But the point is, the Buddhist view of karma, everything we see, hear, taste, touch, smell, especially these 2, it seems, think about it, leave an imprint in the mind. So if this person who's, let's say they're a Buddhist and they want, when I'm dying, thank you, I want to be up, everything I see, everything I hear, it needs to be something that will nourish my connection with the Dharma. That's what I want. You know, I don't want to look Mickey Mouse. I don't want to have the television on all day distressing me. Because the mind, you see, when attachment is very strong, as you're getting more sensitive, your attachment energy is very primordial and is very strong. So we can see this is like old people's homes. The televisions are just on all day and night. And we sort of think, oh, well, you've got to give them something to do, you know. It's completely distressing and distracting. And the thing about attachment energy, it will grasp onto anything. It'll grasp onto anything. So if you don't give the person's attachment anything to grasp onto that isn't useful to them, their mind will be much more peaceful. It's really distressing, you know. I remember a group of people on this book were talking. One woman said they kind of took turns taking care of their dying friend, and we talked. And she was telling us how she had the Patsy Cline music playing. She had the dogs coming in and out, the cats coming in and out, all the friends. It was all sort of hyper exciting, you know. Well, of course, her attachment energy must have been completely rampant. Every time you see something you're attached to, you grasp onto it. So when we talked about this, then the thing is to allow the person to be peaceful and virtuous. This is what their mind needs, because the more attachment there is, the more things you grasp at. When the death time comes, you can't do anything about it, so you're going to be freaking out, you know. So you've got to allow the person the space. I mean, you don't have to treat them like a saint or anything. You still have lovely friends and kindness, but you be very selective. That's another thing Rinpoche says. You be very selective if you're in charge of who you allow into the room, because some people who make trouble or they're very attached to can be very distressing, like their pets, you know. We think pets are so cute in the West, but it's enormous attachment in our culture that can be very distressing. And the last imprint of your mind before you die is your cat. Don't be surprised you get born a cat, because the imprints stay in your mind. This is a very practical thing, you know, it's very logical. So I remember this one woman I went to see one day, 2 different dying people in one day I went to see in California. This was years ago. And I sat with many dying people. And one of them was this old lady with her old husband, about 90, and they were Zen practitioners, and they lived in this little old house. I think she was deaf and he was blind. It was a really wonderful combination. So he totally took care of her. It was just wonderful to see it. And she was just lying in the bed, couldn't move, but she was radiant. It was the most sweet feeling in that house, I tell you, loving and mind relaxed and peaceful. It was so nice to see it. And then the other woman, she lived on her own, and she was like an ordinary human being, a nice human being, but she was dying. And sort of coming to terms with it was very painful. You can't stand to think you're a dying person. It's just awful, you know. And so people took turns taking care of her. So, of course, they had the television on all the time. And you could see she was so stressed, you know, so fretting, anxious, worried, didn't know what to think, didn't know what to do. And I remember sitting, I thought, what do I do? What do I do? How do I help her, you know? So I thought, we'll just sit there and be quiet and sing a mantra. The mantra can bless her mind. And it's an imprint of the Buddhas. It puts something deep in there. It makes a connection. She liked Dharma. And you can see the immediate result, the immediate benefit. For an animal, you can't have anything more powerful than having them hear a mantra. It calms their mind immediately. And they don't know, but it leaves an imprint of the Buddha in their mind, you know, makes a connection. So this woman, she was kind of quiet and peaceful. So when I left, she said she liked Lama Yeshe. I gave them it was before DVDs, the tape, you know, and I said, here's a teaching of Lama Yeshe. Put it into the television so she can watch it. So when I left, they told me later that the television didn't work, and they broke the television, putting in the whatever that thing was, that tape. So nothing worked. So it was quiet in the room, and she died in an hour because her attachment had nothing to cling to. So she was able to calm down. We don't really get this in the West, you know. We think it's love and kindness. It's not. Attachment, and especially at the time of death, when you hold on to anything because you're frantic not to die. But it's primordial. So the conditions of the room are so important. So when time they open their eyes, it should be beautiful, like space and kind and flowers and lovely views out the window. So everything they see calms their mind down, you know, as well as hearing the Dharma, seeing the Dharma, touching it. That's there are many chapters like this, you know, explaining the different things. So anyway, this woman at the teaching, who, when she got home that night, it was her turn. So she turned off Patsy Cline. She tucked out the pets. She chucked out all the people. And then the friend died in an hour. Again, the same thing. Because it's the peaceful environment. You don't want to feed the attachment. We just think, oh, it's being lovely and kind, you know. It's attachment, which is frantic. We always talk about people that don't let go. People that talk like that. They don't let go. So you have all the family running around. Of course you don't want to let go, but if you're quiet, because when you're sick and dying, it's exhausting exhausting to engage with people, you know, because your mind's so sensitive. So the best gift to give is peace and quiet. And as Rinpoche says, as they're getting closer to death, there should be no other sound than say mantra or prayers quietly, hooking their mind, you know. And at a subtle level, because people go in and out, like in a coma or in and out of dream states. That's when the mind is more subtle and more powerful. And that's where mantra can really bless, can really help. So I also this story too, that a friend of mine in Sydney was in the ER because whatever reason they said she was close to death, and she was in a deep coma. Well, she knew lamas. She was very close to Courtin, to Tsongsa Khyentse Rinpoche, and to His Holiness Sakya Trinzen. She'd known their families and things. They'd lived in her house in Sydney. She wasn't really a practitioner. So anyway, when she was very sick in the hospital, her husband gave me permission to go in there at night. It was a long way from the centre, like 40 miles. I had to drive at night. You could get there easily. And I remember I'd just say mantras in her ear. And every now and again, because I'd ask both lamas, I'd ask the students of the lamas to pray for Judy. So every now and again, I'd whisper in her ear. I'd say, Judy, Tsongsa Khyentse Rinpoche is praying for you. Judy, His Holiness Sakya Trinzen is praying for you. Every now and again. So she eventually came out of a coma. She's all perky. And she told me the only thing she can remember from those weeks in a coma was this husky voice. She thought it was a blue lady coming through the window, saying exactly those words. Judy, Tsongsa Khyentse Rinpoche is praying for you. Like that. That's kind of power. You can't argue with that, you know. So this is the power of even the names of the Buddhas who she's connected to. And the mantras, I mean, the number of people, like mantras can go in a much more subtle level, because when you're in your subtle mind, your dream mind or your coma mind is your subtle mind. And it's much more potent, much more powerful. And we know from experiences, and I always tell this story as well, that people in dreams can also be vividly aware of everything. I was at a retreat I did when I first became a nun. You know, I had these vivid dreams. We'd have a nap at lunchtime. And I had these crystal clear dreams. And I was totally vivid dreams. But I was vividly conscious of everything going on around the house and what they were saying and all the pots clanging in the kitchen and the conversations between people. Both the dream mind and that one. That's not uncommon. So the subtle mind, that can hear mantra, that can hear things, you know, and can see and hear, but hear especially this sound, this tense. So mantras and prayers, you can't give a better gift to the animal, to the bird, to your grandma, to the baby. But don't be like one fellow who was a bit of a fanatic Buddhist. His poor wife was so sick, and he'd wake her up like 6 times a day and force her to do her practice. I mean, the poor woman, she was exhausted, you know, give her a break. You do the practice for her. That was awful. And one of the things too, very important about attachment, Rinpoche talks about this in the book. Attachment can be used. This is the Bodhisattva approach. You can use attachment. So attachment, one of the functions of attachment, and it's especially powerful at death, is you hold on to something. You can't bear to let go of it. It's terrifying. We know that in daily life, losing something. That's one function of attachment. Another function of attachment, we know this too, is always looking forward to something. Think about that. So death, there you are. You got to let go of this body. I'm sorry, there's nothing you can do about it. Finally, we spend our lives holding on to things, and we spend our lives looking forward to things, don't we? That's what we do with our attachment. That's what people live their lives by. Now, death, you've only got the looking forward to left. You can't hold on. It's too late. But you can look forward to something. So that's skillful means. So as Rinpoche says, you know, let's say, I'm saying it now, but using Rinpoche's idea, let's say you're Catholic mummy, and she's not quite sure what to think. Maybe she hasn't been going to mass lately, and doesn't know what, but you love her, you think about it. So one of the chapters is what to talk about. Well, you know, in this case, you'd talk about God. You'd let her know how lovely heaven is, so she can start to look forward to heaven. Instead of holding on to this one, look forward to heaven. And because, you see, there's no benefit in holding on to this one, which is attachment, because you can't hold on to it. So the suffering is terrible. But you can use your attachment to look forward to something positive. That's virtuous. It's skillful means. It's very sensible. So as a Buddhist, you can look forward to a future decent human rebirth. I mean, this sounds very peculiar to us in the West, you know, but this is very practical. And what I learned from doing this book, what I learned from editing this book, was that, you know, all the time we like the idea of karma if we're Buddhist, you know, yeah, I don't have a good human rebirth, blah, blah, blah. But part of us, we're still sort of thinking like when I was a Catholic, God will take care of me, you know. So you still kind of vaguely think, oh, I'm sure Lama Zopa will take care of me. What kind of rebirth do you think you like, Robina? Oh, I don't mind, whatever's best. Well, I'm sorry, who's in charge of your future rebirth? You, baby. So you better know what you want. It really struck me working with this book. Like, for example, intention, I want, I will. That's the meaning of the first step of karma, the mind. So if I want to go on a holiday, someone says, where are you going on a holiday? Oh, wherever's best. Well, I'm sorry, the day that comes to get on your aeroplane, if you just sit there and think whatever's best and hoping someone will buy you an air ticket, it doesn't work like that. You've got to buy your air ticket. You've got to decide where you want to go. So what really struck me with this book, basically, if I'm a Buddhist, I'm trying to abide by the laws of karma, and I'm in charge, or try to be in charge, I've got to decide what kind of rebirth I want. Well, you know, there's only 2 options, basically. Human, or what's called a Pure Land. And I'll go into this. Human or a Pure Land. So the Pure Land one, I'd always hear about the Chinese who want to go to Amitabha's Pure Land. For me, it sounded like an alternative to heaven, and I wasn't interested. I want to be a human, I'd say. You know, screw old, boring old Amitabha's Pure Land. I mean, I didn't say it like that, but you understand. But then what's interesting, doing this book, And I thought it was finished, this manuscript, but I knew something wasn't quite finished yet. And then suddenly, out of the blue, this is soon after Lama Zopa Rinpoche's stroke. It was one of the first empowerments he gave. And it was in Advent Harbor in San Jose in California. So Holly, Venerable Holly, Rinpoche's one of his secretaries, sent me a rough transcript of the advice Rinpoche gave at this empowerment. And it was very moving. And suddenly I started to think about, for the first time, the benefit of Amitabha's Pure Land. There's a lovely chapter in the book. And Rinpoche says that Lama Zopa says that if you want to go to a Pure Land, and I'll explain what that means in a minute, then the best one to go is Amitabha, because most Pure Lands, and I'll explain, are only for advanced practitioners. You've got to have realizations of emptiness and really be quite advanced before you have the karma enough, the merit enough to be born in one of the Pure Lands, But Amitabha's Pure Land, Tsongkhapa says, is like ordinary people without high realizations can create the cause to go there. So anyway, what is a Pure Land? Let's just describe it then. We described the 4 ways that our karma ripens. One is the type of rebirth, the body you get. Okay, the physical form. Then there's the mind conjoined with that physical form, all your tendencies, your goodness or your badness. So, if you created the cause to be a lion, to have a lion mummy, when you die, a killing karmic seed will be triggered, and you'll run like, when you die, I haven't been through the final stages of the death process yet, I'll do it. Your mind will run like a magnet to a lion, egg, and sperm. And then you'll get a body of a lion with a mind suitable for a lion's body, Excuse me, I have to blow my nose. So 1 is the kind of body you've got. 2 is the mind that suits that body, because they're going to ripen together. 3 is the karma called experiences, similar to the cause, which really is who we see and how we see and who we meet in this life and how they treat us and see us, And 4, and this is what I'm going to get to, is the environment, the configuration of the 4 elements that make up the environment in which we live. And we can see all beings have an environment. Lions have an environment. Ants have an environment. Worms have an environment. Now, the same with spirits and hell beings, which is what Buddha assert do exist. So if all bodies are made of the 4 elements, you can see logically then a being who's due to intense attachment, their bodies conjoin with the predominance of the air energy. They've got to have an environment, which are all our karmic appearances. Then you've got a hell being. You could argue their mind is conjoined with the predominance of a fire energy, and they have the karmic appearances of that kind of suffering being. All beings have environments. So, in other words, you don't float in the sky. Well, okay, so now, what is a Buddha? A Buddha is a being who's done the job of ridding their mind of all the rubbish and has perfected the goodness and the wisdom. That's the Buddha's mind. Buddha's telling us every one of us can become that. So when you've just got that level, you're pure, unmanifest, all-knowing, all-compassionate, all-pervasive consciousness, then you're just existing in subtle space. There's no body, there's no environment, because you're just only mind only. But what good is that to suffering sentient beings? What motivates a person to become a Buddha is compassion, to help others. So once you've done the job of becoming a Buddha, even high-level bodhisattvas, they don't need a rebirth. But out of their compassion, they take on human forms and other forms solely for the sake of others. That's what they do. Now, there's a regular kind of environment, a regular kind of body, the one of Buddha behind me, which is known as the emanation body. That's like Shakyamuni Buddha back in India 2,500 years ago. This Buddha mind manifesting as a human in a human environment. So we can hear him and talk to him and hear his teachings. But in the Vajrayana model, as we know, there's this subtler form of a Buddha's body called the enjoyment body. And in the Vajrayana, that's all those depictions of the Buddha, like there's millions of them, male ones, female ones, all these cute with subtle light bodies holding certain things. It's like this visual language. They're all just manifestations of different psychological qualities. So that's a specific manifestation of Buddha's mind, subtle light. Well, they also have an environment made of subtle light, as ridiculous as that sounds to us. That's a Pure Land. So all the Buddhas have their own style. You know, there's compassionate ones and fierce ones. So the Pure Land of a wrathful Buddha, there'd be skeletons and hideous things, right? And they all have meaning. Well, Amitabha is one of the 5, you know, Buddha families, excuse me. And his Pure Land is accessible to ordinary people. Tsongkhapa says that. So then Rinpoche talked in this chapter about then having the wish to be born in Amitabha's Pure Land. So for the first time, I became a fan. And I've decided, I'm aiming, you know, like you decide on your holiday, you go to Italy, you go to Spain. No, I'm going to go to Amitabha's Pure Land. So I've decided. And every day I go hit my pillow at night. I have myself reciting on my iPod, my phone. I have myself reciting the prayer of Tsongkhapa's, the prayer, the aspiration to go to Amitabha's Pure Land. So that's my goal. Now, if I miss the plane there, I'm going to get a human one, hopefully. And if I miss the plane to a human birth, then I'm sorry, I'm lost. You better start praying for me, okay? So basically, you narrow down the options like this. You've got 2 options. You get born a human, or you get born in the Pure Lands, Amitabha. Now, if you're going to go to Italy or Spain or Timbuktu, you need to know the causes of getting there, don't you? Well, you want to know the causes of a human rebirth. So that's, first of all, the strong wish. A strong wish to be born as a human to a Buddhist family, so you can carry on spiritual path. You know, you create the cause by wanting that, and then you live in vows, you create all the right causes, and then when you die, karma takes care. Well, it's the same with a Pure Land. I mean, karma is intention, and then you create the cause. I want to go to Italy, and then you create the causes, and then you'll get to Italy. It's not surprising. So that's the thing. So Amitabha's Pure Land. And then what you do there, you get enlightened very quickly. That's all. And so you rush, then you can come back and help sentient beings on Earth and the planets, ordinary people. Because you're highly evolved now, you can do what you like. You have 27 boyfriends or manifest in hundreds of bodies and whatever you want to do. You benefit sentient beings. Okay. So the point I'm making is, at this point, this person's halfway through death. Now they've stopped breathing. Let's say it's my mum. Let's say it's your Buddhist boyfriend or something, you know, they're Buddhist. So they've stopped breathing. By this point, you in the room, you'll be totally quiet. You'll be saying only the prayers. And Rinpoche gives exact instructions of what to do. Because one whole part, part 4, I think, or whatever it is the different scenarios in which you die. So what to do if your loved one dies at home? What to do if your loved one dies in hospital? What to do if your loved one dies suddenly? What to do if your loved one gives their organs? What to do if your loved one is a holy being? You know, with that person, you lock the door and leave them in peace. They know what they're doing. Now, the interesting one is what to do if you're giving your organs. We'll go into that. And also what you do if you die suddenly. But the usual scenario, mostly these days, is you're in an institution, you know. If you can be at home, it's the ideal, or be in a place where you've got peace and quiet. A friend of mine, her husband died in Melbourne, and she was in a nursing home. So when he stopped breathing, she shooed out all the doctors and nurses and locked the door and spent 3 days with him and went through the whole process and did all the prayers and everything. So they were undisturbed. That's the ideal. And many hospitals allow that. You know, I remember I was at Adelaide in Australia, and one Vietnamese family was there with their daddy, and he passed away. And they allowed the doctors and nurses, because they had obviously had the money to pay for a private room, they allowed them to a couple of days, you know, without touching the body. And the doctors and nurses would sort of snuck in and have a little look and listen to what we were doing, you know. So that's the ideal. You've got to be in control of the situation. This is why having this education, you need to know all this in advance, because what happens is we never think about death. And then when you're in hospital, you give all the power to the doctors and nurses. Well, their business is the body. They're not worried about the mind. It's not their job. Your job is the mind. So you need to be in control of it and know exactly the scenario you want. And you can, even if your loved one is in the hospital, you can negotiate in advance. I mean, doctors and nurses in hospitals are very kind. They want to help. And you can negotiate. And when my mummy dies, can we please leave her as long as possible? Or can we have another room where we can leave her in peace? I mean, Lama Yeshe passed away in Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles in 1984, 84. And the nurses and doctors apparently were so kind. They allowed all the students, including Rinpoche, to put him on a gurney, and they gave him a room all day, just where they did prayers and practices all day for him, you know. So you can negotiate with the hospitals. And the crucial thing is not to disturb them. Because the point is this: once they've stopped breathing, which of course for the West, you're ready for the body bag, but you are not dead yet, your subtle mind is now there. It's like you're in the deepest coma, but you've stopped breathing. So your subtle mind, which is what is the coma mind, the dream mind, and this is the mind that's still existing, the senses have ceased, the gross mind has ceased. So in just the same way that when you're in a coma, you can be conscious of things like my Judy, or like me, even in that dream state. So too could a person who's technically dead be conscious at the subtle level, which is why you have to have absolute quiet. The only thing will be the Buddha's prayers, the mantras, no disturbance. It's like a holy place, and you'd leave it for 3 days, ideally. But that's difficult these days. A friend of mine, Yeshi Kadro, who for many years directed our hospice service in Queensland called Karuna Hospice. I mean, they're really successful. They're funded by the government and things. And they provide helpers, not just for Buddhists, in home, palliative care, And she said that most people don't die in hospice. Most people don't die at home now. Used to be in old-fashioned days. I know when my grandma died, she was at home, and then all the nuns would come and say prayers and everything. So if it is in an institution, you've got to have your wits about you, know exactly the scenario you want, try to be in charge of the process, and try to make it as peaceful and as quiet as possible, which if you're in a ward is almost virtually impossible. So it's really quite difficult, So from the time you stop breathing, that's the 4th stage, all the elements have ceased. Those various wisdoms have ceased. Now only your mental consciousness is now existing. Your senses have ceased completely. So there's no evidence to the external world of any life, which is why they think you're dead. So what happens now is, of course, as we know, if you're going to be giving your organs, it's an interesting topic. If you're going to give your organs, now they want to keep you alive. So they keep you breathing, basically, don't they? They keep your heart going, your lungs working, and you look like a real living person, all kind of toasty and warm. And you are, in fact, a living person. Because if you can, as Lama Zopa says in the book, if you can breathe, then your mind is there. In other words, if it's an actual dead body from which the mind has left, you can never get it to breathe. It's an impossibility. It's the presence of the mind, the mental consciousness, that enables the body to be breathing and the lungs working and all the bits and pieces working. This is very clear for this model of the mind. So if if you forget whether your organs for the moment, we'll discuss that later. So this process, the next stage, and this can take quickly, but it can take up to 3 days before the mind leaves the body. And this is a crucial point. So the next stage, the 5th stage, the senses have ceased, the elements have ceased, those 4 wisdoms have gone. So now there's this, according to this Vajrayana model, now there's different elements, different components of the subtle mind and the subtle body. And the subtle body consists of what they call this red and white Kundalini. It's this red and white liquid energy. And at the heart chakra, this subtle body is made of 72,000 subtle channels, like a subtle nervous system. And there are all these subtle thousands of channels. There's a central channel that goes from your crown all the way down, just in front of your spine, all the way down to the end of the penis for the male and the ends at the cervix for the female. Then you've got 2 side channels starting here, they go up and then go all the way along the central channel either side and end at the organs like before. And then at different points, they call them wheels or chakras, there's a constriction of the various other channels, all blocking things, Here, at the heart, below the navel, and 3 secret ones, they call them. 3 on the penis for the male and internal for the female. Excuse me. So then, what else is there? That's right. There's a subtle liquid energy called the red and white Kundalini. What this is, at the time of conception in your mummy's fallopian tube or wherever it happens, actually what happens is once you've left, in our case from the before, once we left the body, and we'll finish the death process in a minute, once you've gone through the 8 stages, and eventually you're very subtle. You've got gross consciousness, subtle consciousness, very subtle consciousness. And the 8th stage is called the very subtle consciousness or clear light consciousness. It's the subtlest level of your mind. All the grosser levels have ceased. And it's inextricably linked with a very subtle wind energy, prana. So that very subtle, so when your consciousness leaves that, then it goes reverse process through these 8 stages, and you wake up in the intermediate state, or the bardo, which is exactly like a dream. There's no difference, except you've left this body. But it's the same experience of a dream, but more intense than regular dreams. And basically you're hanging out there waiting for your new mummy and daddy to drop into bed, right? So it can be up to 7 weeks that you spend time in this intermediate state. It's all very elaborate how they describe it. So basically, at the time that your mummy and daddy hop into bed and the conditions arise for your mind, in our case, as this human being, for us to go, the karma ripens. And in the intermediate state, you go through the 8 prayers, you rush like a magnet to that egg and sperm. And then your very subtle consciousness joins the egg and sperm. But what it actually joins is a subtle red and white drop. There's a subtler energy of the mother's and father's egg and sperm, the way they describe here, a subtler liquid energy called the red Kundalini, the white Kundalini, the red from the mother, the white from the father. And your very subtle conscious joins that subtle red and white drop, which then is in the grosser level called the egg and the sperm. So that's the beginning of you. So that very subtle red and white drop from your mummy and daddy conjoined with your consciousness, you are the beginning of you now, and it begins at the heart chakra. And that stays there the entire life. So when you die, everything deconstructs and gets to that very subtle level. And when that splits open, that's when your consciousness goes. So your mind joins that at conception, and then death is when you leave that and it splits open, and then the egg and the sperm just go down the toilet like the rest. This is how they describe in the Vajrayana. So the red and white Kundalini is right at your heart chakra. They call this indestructible drop from your mummy and daddy. But there's also the other level of this red and white Kundalini that exists in all the other channels, the predominance of which is the white one is up here at the crown, which is the source of the ability of the human body to experience joy. And then the red one is at the navel, and that's the reason for the capacity of the human body to experience heat. So the 5th stage, this is simple now, keep it simple. The mind gets slightly more subtle. And then the white Kundalini goes up, it melts down the central channel and comes to the heart chakra. And the next vision, the 5th one, is like a white sky. It's very brief. The next one, mind gets more subtle, and then the red Kundalini comes up to the heart chakra, up the central channel, and then there's a red vision, and the mind's getting more subtle. And the next one, they both come to the heart chakra, and then they join, and there's like the next level, the next sign is like dark. They call it dark appearance, like a faint. Then when that opens, that's the clear light mind. Now, for most people, you now stay there unconscious for up to 3 days. The yogis have been through this experience totally in control. They've practiced all their lives meditating and doing all the sadhana practices of the deity practices are kind of engineered to combine with the death process. So you go through this new practice. So the great yogis have actual concentration. They can actually go through these stages of dissolution, deconstruction in their daily meditation. So now death, as Lama Zopa says, there's a chapter there, is what they've been waiting for. And they're able to go through the process of death without losing control and get to the very subtle level. And the point of this is because the very subtle level of mind, the clear light mind, is like the microscope of your mind. That level of mind is capable of realizing emptiness and even becoming enlightened. So they can spend days, weeks, even months in meditation. And that's the moment they've been waiting for. It's the subtlest, most capable, most potent level of your mind. And those yogis are ready for it. So the best we can do is at least not die with fear, They're able to control the process, and then they can control their rebirth. They know exactly where they're going. It's not uncommon for the yogis, So the 5th stage, those go through these stages, and then once the indestructible drop opens, what you got from your mummy and daddy, then your clear light consciousness leaves and goes through those 8 stages in reverse and wakes up in the dream state, like the bardo. And then when your new mummy and daddy are ready, whether it's a lion mummy and daddy or human mummy and daddy, when the karma ripens and you run like a magnet and off you go. You've got your new rebirth, So all this, the triggering of the karmic seeds that determine your rebirth occur once the death process starts and before you stop breathing. That's the crucial period. We need to be peaceful, virtuous, calm. You help them, you're hearing mantras, whatever it is, because that'll enable them to, when your mind is calm, even when the grasping arises, which is natural, you're hearing the Dharma, you're managing. So that'll help trigger a virtuous karmic seed. In our cases, that's also happened. It triggers a virtuous karmic seed, which is why we've got a human mummy. So it's a very technical explanation. It's not hit and miss. No one put you there. We put ourselves there. So the more we can be in control of this, the more we can lead our lives with this aspiration of the type of rebirth we want so we can carry on our path. And of course, in our culture, this is so difficult because even though we might be Buddhist and we like the idea of reincarnation, it sort of still feels peculiar and a bit embarrassing, rather like a hippie, so we don't like talking about it. So we've got to think about it carefully. And if you're going to have this philosophy, try and use it as much as you can, So any questions, please? No questions. Okay. So I'm talking about the death process, and I'm also talking about how to help your loved ones. So if you were helping a loved one here, you could be like my friend Miffy, Miffy with the pink hair, when her mummy died, the center in Brisbane, which Miffy is the spiritual program coordinator of, it's been going since I met Miffy when she was a little girl. She's a little blonde little thing, I met her when she was about 9. I met her in Melbourne. Her mum was my friend. It was before I became a nun. And so Miffy must be 50 something. My God, I thought she was still 9, but she's not. She's 50 something. That's what happens, isn't it? You get old, you forget. So anyway, when Inta, her mum, died, she was Latvian. She died at the center. So Miffy did the whole trip. Miffy kept it for 3 days, went through the process. The room was like a little shrine room. They had mantras and practices playing all the time. She wrote about it. It's very moving. She wrote about the whole experience of the days and weeks and months, beforehand. And then when Inta died and what they did and everything, And that's a classic kind of Buddhist one you do. In all the monasteries, they do that. They leave the bodies for 3 days and they have prayers and practices 24 hours a day in the room, helping the consciousness. And so lots of practices. So Rinpoche's practices, the majority of these 87 practices are things that you would apply in the first weeks and months and days. What to hear, what to think about, what to meditate on, the purification practices, what to do, blah, blah, blah. Lots and lots of practices are mentioned, And of course, of all of these, as Rinpoche says, if you want to do just one practice, you can't do better than Medicine Buddha. There's a Medicine Buddha mantra, there's a Medicine Buddha names, and there's a Medicine Buddha sadhana, practice. So it's up to us. But this is one of the most beneficial practices, Rinpoche says, because there is such a lot. And that's why probably my friend said she didn't know what to do. Because Rinpoche teaches so many things, so many variations. It's kind of overwhelming, And all the practices in the book. So lots of things to do at the beginning to make it conducive for your loved one in their room, to make it beautiful and peaceful. And know the person's style, what the kind of practice they like to do, how they like, whether you can read the prayers to them, what they want. You've got to make sure you know the person and what they need. And if you're in charge of the process, then you really have to be in control of who comes into the room and what does what. If you're just one of the family and you have no control, there's nothing you can do, The assumption in this book is that you're the one in control of navigating the person's experiences, So you've got to know what they are, if they like religion or not, if they're Catholic or not, if they're Muslim, if they're communist, whatever. And then even, you don't obviously, you don't have to say mantras. I mean, mantras sometimes are good because they just sound like lovely music. It's not like you're shoving religion down their throat. It's a very peaceful sound. It's just helpful. Don't get nervous about that, And you've got to know the person, what they need, what's best. You talk to the Christians about heaven, about God, how God loves you. You talk to Buddhists about karma, about their teacher, about whatever suits their mind. You need to know and be very skillful and wise and very quiet. That's the main energy, Just giving them courage, just that your presence makes them feel safe. This is the most precious gift to give. And for your pussycat as well, and the ant, and the bird, and the whoever sentient beings, So if you what if your loved one dies at home? Okay, the ideal scenarios, if you can, is you leave for 3 days. And you've got to check the laws, you've got to check the environment. It won't be long, Lorna. You've got to check what is right in your country, you've got to know what the laws are so you can be comfortable about doing that. Leaving the body for 3 days. And then, the thing in that 3 days, you'd have lots of practices done. You do them in the room. We have them done at monasteries. things like that, There's certain things you do when they stop breathing. All the instructions are given there, Yes, Lorna, what question do you have, darling?
Yes, thank you, Robina. Always good to be here with you.
Good, darling.
I was listening to an interview with Robert Thurman a couple of days ago on death and dying. And he made a big point about at one section, I guess it's the clear white light, about sort of not being afraid to keep moving towards it. He said, if you can remember anything when you're going through the dying process, is to not be afraid of the clear white light. And I'm just wondering if you know.
Well, I mean, darling, okay. We hear lots of descriptions, don't we, about this light, this like kind of going along a tunnel and there's light at the end of the tunnel. And it fits with people's experiences. But also, by the way, it's interesting. I remember reading about a Christian doctor who interviewed his patients about their near-death experiences, and they had hell-like experiences. They were not like white light. That's a fact. I'll tell you about those in a minute. So first of all, there's the white light experience, but the clear light mind is something much more subtle. It's when you're going through the process. That is the experience some people would have. But that's still quite a gross level, Lorna. But it's not the clear light mind. Once you got to the clear light mind, that is the most subtle level of mind. There won't be any, at that point, there are no appearances of anything. But the white light one would be as you'd start to die and the senses cease, and then that would begin to happen then. Do you understand? So that would be important. Yes, absolutely, because it's a new experience. And attachment is very strong. So if you can remember that, and you do your meditations every day in daily life, and you can imagine these different stages, learn to look forward to them, to imagine them, then you don't get afraid. Absolutely. It's a good point. But that's not the clear light mind. That's much more subtle. That comes later.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Let me tell you these interesting experiences about this doctor. 25 years ago, I remember watching on the internet, a Christian doctor, an American. He started interviewing his patients about their near-death experiences. And many people have these hell-like, literally terrifying experiences, which is really exactly fitting with this Buddhist view of what karmic seed is triggered before you stop breathing, because you're still conscious and you start to see the future life coming because your mind's getting more subtle. So there's two examples that are wonderful. One fellow, he had to have heart operations in the hospital, and he was in the bed and he was really anxious and worried about it. And suddenly he found himself standing next to his wife by the bed. He remembered saying he said something to his wife, but she didn't respond. He got upset, but he realized later, looked over at the bed and he saw his body in there. So obviously he had this, what they call out of body experience. But what's really crucial to understand is your mind hasn't left the body. It's your subtle mind, which is the mind that dreams. So it's like he's having a dream, basically, but very vivid. And you feel, or people who have out-of-body experiences of floating above their bodies, you can't have left your body. If your mind has left the body, you are dead. But the experience is like that. It's as if you're floating above your body, as if you're doing here and going there, very vivid. So like his experience was this. Suddenly he heard these voices out in the corridor, all very nice. Come on, John, come on. Oh, good, I'm going for my operation. So he went outside and he started going with this person. But roughly, he said, they described the experience. He said they're all kind of really nice to him and kept walking and walking. And this I find very fascinating, by the way. He said, the experience of walking along, this is the first point, the experience of walking along that corridor, it took as long as walking from here to Alaska. Well, honey, even if he's in Oregon, it's a long, long way. So my feeling is this is really fascinating. The whole experience could probably not be more than a few seconds. So this idea of the experience of time, I find extremely fascinating. It took longer than walking from here to Alaska. So the experience of time is what's really interesting, isn't it? It was probably a few seconds in reality. So that was first interesting point. Anyway, they started he keeps walking on the corridor, waiting for his operation. It never comes. And he said they started being mean to him and they ripped his flesh and abused him. It was the worst experience of his life. And then they left him. And he was left in this, something like, he said, I was left in this darkness and despair, the like of which I've never had. He was in complete dark and despair and he didn't know what to do. So then he thought, I should pray. And he hadn't prayed since a little boy, right? He tried, our Father who art in heaven, and he couldn't go any further. Then he tried, the Lord is my shepherd, and he couldn't go any further. And then all of a sudden, he said, he cried out, Jesus, help me. So way over there, a tiny white light, and it kept coming closer, and it became more radiant and more bliss. It was Jesus, right? Completely encompassed him. It completely healed his body. His mind was completely radiant with bliss. And of course, he wanted to go with Jesus. Well, you would, wouldn't you? No, Jesus said, you go back and you serve me. So he did. He woke up and told his story. I mean, this is a fascinating story. But this is the point about karmic appearances. Can you imagine if some naked green lady called Tara turned up? He would have been in a state of shock. He didn't have a karmic appearance of Tara. He had a karmic appearance of Jesus. So it's karmic appearances, how energy appears to us. You understand? He would have been really surprised when he, this naked green lady, looking all sexy and gorgeous. He wouldn't know what to do. But the other fellow, this is very interesting too, this other one, this fits exactly with the Buddha's view. So fascinating. This other one, he was an alcoholic. They both confessed to being mean to their wives, I must say, in their stories, right? This man, he was mean to his wife as well, and he was an alcoholic. So what happened to him was suddenly he finds himself walking along this tunnel with the hell at the end, this conflagration, this hideous fire, and all his friends who had died in human form, which is what happens. You have the karmic appearance of your friends in their human form, but clearly if you're burning up, you can't be in a human form. But that's the appearance he had, and they're all shouting at him, don't come, go away, go back, you know. So he went back and he served Jesus too. These are very fascinating stories. They fit exactly with the Buddhist logic, the Buddhist story of what happens, you know, the mind, all these vivid karmic appearances. So the white tunnel, the white light tunnel, or the hell tunnel, that's the beginning. That's before the mind gets to the subtlest level, Lorna. That's well before. That's when the mind is still at the mental conscious level, and then the karma finishes and they come back again. They don't die. And that's similar with people who have out-of-body experiences. Like this is an interesting point about organ donating. Very fascinating. There's a chapter in there, and I discussed it with Rinpoche and asked him questions. So obviously what they do is once you stop breathing, they keep you alive. They keep, you know, they think you're dead, but they keep you breathing. So then they have to keep you this way for days sometimes until they're ready to do the procedure, to take your organs. So then they put you on the obviously in the operating table. And that, so but basically your subtle mind is still there. Now most people, when they die, won't have or most people when they go to sleep don't have out-of-body experiences. You had a whole chapter in the book about people who had out-of-body experiences while they're under anesthetic. In other words, totally unconscious, but the vividest experiences of floating above their body, although they might haven't left their body, but their subtle mind is aware, and they can see everything the doctors are doing. They know everything the doctors are talking about. They can talk about all the music they played. And of course, most of the medical profession, as this is this book I read, he reported this man, this Nick Teresi, this book called The Undead by this American medical journalist. He had a whole chapter on people with these experiences. And, you know, most of the medical profession just ignore it. They say it's ridiculous, not possible. And he talked about one example of one woman. He joked about this, who had to have such a radical procedure that they were going to do something on her brain. They had to almost make her what they would consider dead. No organs could be working. They stopped everything. They drained her of all liquids. I mean, whatever happened, I don't know exactly all the words, but there's no way in the world she could have any conscious experiences as far as they were concerned. But she reported, he said, the most vivid out-of-body experience. So people just can't argue with this, you know, and that's why in this book, he quoted one doctor in this business saying, I can now say with certainty that consciousness is not a function of the brain. I don't know what it is, but I can say that much. So this is marvelous that people are, you know, I think that the medical profession now, this is a result too of a lot of all the communication with His Holiness and the Tibetan Buddhists are actually questioning their assumptions about what is life. You know, it's marvelous, I think. So the dangers of this is what Rinpoche talks about in the book. Because this example I'm about to give you, that this man quoted in the book, is showing the problem. So there's this one woman who offered her organs, and so they had it on the machine, all breathing nicely, and she's on the operating table, and her senses have ceased. She can't feel anything, but her mental consciousness is still there. And so what happened was the nurse monitoring the heartbeat said the moment they got the circular saw ready to cut her open up and take her organs, her heart went from 100 to 200 beats a minute. So that the author cracked a joke. I wonder what a dead person has to be worried about, But this is really, it seems to me, evidence that she was her mind was still conscious. And she was having what's so-called out of body, and she was freaking out completely. Don't they realize I'm not dead yet? And they're going to cut me open and take my organs. Well, her mind would have freaked out completely. When she passed away first, when the breathing stopped, a virtuous karmic seed would have been triggered. Lama Zopa says it's an amazing action of generosity and compassion to give your organs. So most people would die a very peaceful death because of that virtue. But there she is on the operating table. She's not dead yet. Then the karma could reverse because she freaked out. And maybe when her mind left, then she could go to the lower realm. So that he said the doctors need to be careful. Of course, they don't know this view. That's an example. Now, most people, I had an operation. I wasn't aware. So many people who do give their organs won't have that problem because they won't be seeing what's going on, which means it's a wonderful thing to do. But it's difficult because now more and more in Europe, the law is you will give your organs. And you have to consciously say you won't give your organs now. So, and this author was very cynical about the profession, the arrogance, the manipulating of people. I mean, there's good things too. I'm not complaining, but I'm just reporting this fellow. He's a medical journalist. Very interesting. So the ideal, if you die at home, you'd have 3 days if you can do that, or in a private hospital. Then the thing is, before you let the body go, there are various indicators, various signs of whether or not the mind has left the body. And it's quite easy to check, apparently. Well, first of all, as the person is dying, the heat gradually leaves the body at that third stage. So the heat leaves from the crown and everything gathers at the heart chakra, or from the feet up and everything gathers at the heart chakra. So when you've been through the 8 stages, and if your mind is still in the body, it would be your very subtle consciousness is at your heart chakra. So if you put your hand above there and you feel it will be distinctly warm, then the mind is still there. And that can be with dogs and everything, that's a sign the mind hasn't left yet. But if it's cold there, like the rest of the body, that means the mind has left. That's one sign. Another sign, that the mind has left is when the very subtle drop at the heart opens up and the very subtle clear light consciousness leaves. The red drop will carry on down and eventually leave through the nostril, and the white one will carry on down and leave through the sex organ. I think it's opposite for the male and the female. That's also a sign, if you see those subtle drops, that the mind has left the body. There are 2 signs. And always, so if you've got your loved one in the hospital in 3 days, you've done your prayers, or at home, and they say always it's never lasts longer than 3 days, they say. Then the mind is gone, you double check, and then the body's ready to do the trip. The mind is gone now. Then there's all the next chapter is what to do, different things. Yes, Lorraine. Unmute, sweetheart. Lorraine, your hand is up. Nothing coming. Okay. Okay. So when you're ready, Lorraine, just unmute yourself and talk to me, darling. Oh, there
Can
you
you
are.
hear me?
Okay. I can hear you, darling. Yeah. Go on. What's your
Okay,
question?
yeah. I think Anna's hand was up first.
Doesn't matter. I'm talking to you now. Don't you worry.
Okay. I don't know if you've heard about the God helmet experiments. There was a doctor who he was actually exploring creativity. So he made this helmet with electrodes that stimulated the mind. I think the ones that I remember the best were the experiments on the right temporal lobe. And people would have experiences like they were surrounded by either beneficial or evil spirits or whatever, depending on the person. And I dated someone for a while who had a serious head injury on, I think it was the right side. And he would have these attacks where he would go into these crazy blissful, he would be crying, talking to God. It was very terrifying to me.
Yes.
But
Yes.
I was just wondering what your take is on that.
No, that would, I mean, that can be, I mean, the body and the mind are intimately connected. That's very clear, because consciousness for the Buddha is not the brain. So the consciousness and the physical, including the brain, are intimately connected. But that's just at the gross level. And that is certainly by affecting the body, we know can affect the mind. So that's not inconceivable that certain things touching the brain can then trigger some subtler experiences for people, which is coming from past memories, things that they're seeing. But the part of their mind that's seeing those things is the subtle mind. That's the point. So yeah, I mean, that's not inconceivable for the Buddhist view. Yeah. Yes, Anna, talk to me, sweetheart.
Hello, Venerable. We have an anonymous question in chat, which is, it asks, when the consciousness leaves the body at death, does it leave the heart chakra from the red and white drop? Because I've heard it can leave through different parts of the body, which correspond with the different types of rebirth.
Okay, so when the consciousness leaves the body, it's at the time before it leaves the body, it's conjoined, the very subtle mind is conjoined with the red and the white drop. The second the drop opens, the consciousness will then leave, but from different places. If the person is going to be born a human, the consciousness will leave through the eyes. If the person is going to be born as a spirit realm, a suffering realm, it'll leave through the mouth. If you're going to be born in the hell realms, it'll leave through the anus. If you're going to be born in the animal realm, it'll leave through the sex organ. If you're going to go to a pure land, it'll leave through the crown chakra. That's how they say. You're exactly right. Yes, that's what they say. So the point, so if your beloved is in the hospital and you've done your 3, or in home, you've done your 3 days, you observed that the consciousness might still be there. So to make sure, or you might think it's gone, then what you do is you very vigorously pull the hair at the crown chakra, which is towards the back of the body, or you tap very strongly. And if the mind is there, that could encourage it to leave through the crown chakra, which means you'll get a pure land rebirth. So they say that, even though maybe another karmic seed might have been triggered when you stop breathing. So I don't quite understand the relationship between those things. And you do that in every scenario. So then if your loved one's dying at home, then if your loved one dies in hospital, then if you've even got a half an hour, Rinpoche says, try and do some practices. Take as long as you can. So one of the things about if your loved one's in hospital, say your mummy dies at 3 in the morning, the first thing we do is we rush off and ask the nurses. You don't do that. You stay there and you have as long as you can with your mummy, saying all the prayers and doing all the practices undisturbed as long as possible, And then when the inevitable happens in the morning and the people come in, then and already you would have prearranged with the hospital that if you could have the bed as long as possible or have another room as long as possible, you try to do your best. But if you've only got a half an hour, then you do what practices you can. And then before they take the body, you should do this business again here, which can help force the consciousness to leave the body, which is absolutely the best. But the other, mostly too, they won't let you take the body home. When Lama Yeshe passed away in 1984, the laws in California allowed us, I wasn't there, but the students, and to take Lama Yeshe's body from Cedars-Sinai Hospital and drove it down to up to Vajrapani Institute. Took about 14 hours driving up the coast. They allowed us to take the body. But now you can't do that, I think. When a friend of mine in Santa Cruz died, the mummy and the daddy and the daughter were all Buddhist. And the daddy had a heart attack, and he got his wife to promise that she wouldn't call the doctor, but she freaked out when he had a heart attack. So she called the doctors. So they took him to hospital, and he didn't want all that. So we got to the hospital at dawn, me and the daughter, and then we did all the practices for the father. You could tell he was distressed. He didn't want to be kept alive. It's okay. We did the various practices, and then they unwired him, and then we went with them to take him to the mortuary, and they were very gentle and kind and didn't make the body up. You got to be very gentle with the body. This is another scenario that you could do, So then we went to the mortuary, and they kept the body there all day. We were allowed with him all day on the gurney, and then at 4 o'clock we had to go, and they put him in the fridge with the other bodies. We asked them if we could stay all night, and they said no. But so what we did was we gave them a CD of the monks chanting, and they promised they'd play it in the fridge. So all the other poor non-Buddhists got some Buddhist prayers in the mortuary fridge. So we came back next morning and we did more prayers with them and so on and so forth like that. So you could do that. Or the other option is, Rinpoche mentions in the book, you could ask them to leave your body of your loved one in the fridge at the hospital and let them be there, you know, and you do prayers and practices for 3 days at home. You could do that. And then after the 3 days. But if it's only going to be the half an hour and you're handing over the body to the hospital, you do what you can. Because if the mind is still in the body and they take the body and do all the things they do with it, it can disturb the person. Like the person on the operating table. It can disturb their mind. So the ideal is not to touch the body until you're certain the mind has gone. But if you're forced to, you do what you can, you know, even 30 minutes, Rinpoche says. And then you try and do this one as well to force the consciousness to go. So the next scenario is what to do if your loved one dies suddenly. Well, that's the problem. We have a panic attack, don't we? Freak out, you know, your father drops dead in the soup or something. Like, so then what you do your best, and keep your wits about you. Of course, you do what you can to get the person to be alive still, you know, all your business with the heart and everything, but you do prayers and practices for them right there, you know. You try to keep your wits about you because you want to help their mind. And the organs one I told you about. And then if your loved one's a yogi, leave them in peace. Walk out the door, close the door, and let them do what they want. They know what they're doing. They're fine. So then, after the 3 days, now you're ready. Once the body's left, now you're ready to do the funeral business, you know. So for a funeral, you'd have all, I mean, they don't have that sort of like, they have a bit different in Tibetans, but we would have a ceremony. All the people gather. So then you would, you know, do all the prayers, and maybe and there's lots of prayers in the book which she recommends that are good to do once the person's died. You could have all those done. You could have a person give a talk about impermanence. You could do lots of things like that, you know. Then you'd either cremate or bury. Well, in Tibet, old-fashioned days, they you know, in India they cremate, they burn, don't they? It's very efficient. I remember when one of our nuns died, a young nun at Courtin. Just down the hill, there's Courtin, and down the hill is the nunnery. So one of the nuns died. So the monks got the jeep, went down, chucked her into a bag, sewed her up, and then took her down to the fire, put some wood on, and they did this little fire puja. It was very cheap, no coffins, no money, very simple. You get the wood, you have a fire, and you burn the body. That's it. And then you can keep the ashes. So one of the most important practices Rinpoche recommends many practices to do after the person has died. You know, there's lots of things you can do for the benefit of the person. So like, for example, giving away all their possessions. Most people have wills, but it's really important to give away all their possessions because that generosity karma can benefit the person. For example, you would have all sorts of prayers done. Either you can, in the book, there's different email addresses and websites, for example, for Courtin Monastery, to definitely do pujas and prayers for your loved one. Then once you've done the ashes, you either do the cremation or you have the body. You're going to bury them. You keep a bit of their hair or their nails or the ashes, just a little bit of the ashes. And then you have them specially blessed with a particular practice said to be very powerful called Jangwa. It's very long. It's not in the book, but it's best to have experts do it. So you'd send the remains of your loved one to a monastery, or you ask them wherever lamas are who know how to do it, and they would bless the remains. And this is said to be really beneficial. As Lama Zopa says, there's no benefit for the dying or for you if you just scatter the ashes somewhere and they're not blessed, or go to a cemetery and put flowers. There's no benefit. But when you've blessed the ashes or the remains with this practice called Jangwa, they literally become like relics. So it's very, very beneficial for the dying person, for the dead person, and for you. And then you can make another practice to do. You can have little tsattas, or little kind of bas-relief images of the Buddhas, different monasteries. And it's got it in the book too. You can send the ashes to this place, and they can make these little images of the Buddha mixed with the ashes of your loved one. That's incredibly beneficial. There are several centers, like at least 2 in Australia. I know there's one in California, where you can have a little plot, like in a stupa, have it in a stupa, and it's left there. And it's like sort of a miniature cemetery, but because it's mixed with a stupa, it's again very beneficial for your loved one and beneficial for you when you go to do practices and things. So Rinpoche talks about this, it's very clear. In other words, everything's for maximum benefit for the karma of you and your loved one. It's not based on sentimentality and attachment, What's beneficial? It's based on what's beneficial. So that's why it's so important you make your wishes known. You write all this out, exactly what you want to happen when you die. People call it a living will, don't they, or something like that. You should have it be known. This is what you want, you know. Any questions, people? 1:15. Got 15 minutes left. Any questions? No questions. Yes, yes, Alona, darling.
Hi, Venerable.
Hello, sweetheart.
Nice to see you.
Yes.
Thank you for your teachings.
Good.
I was wondering about, my grandmother, when she died, I didn't know she died, and I loved her dearly. She was very good to me. But I saw the dream. She came to say goodbye, and I saw the people, like women, took her and told me, "Don't worry about her; she'll be fine." But I had no idea, so I called my
That's
family.
a very common experience, Alona. I've heard that many times. Yes, it's wonderful.
My question is, what is it? I didn't know anything about this, but I have seen that, and when I called, it is true. Is it our like?
It's because of the very strong
connection?
karmic connection you have with this person.
That's so.
You
When
have a
it's
strong
broken,
karmic connection
is
with
it?
her, so you're kind of aware at a subtler level of what's happening. Yeah, it's that for sure.
That's what it is. That was my question. What is this like?
That's
Why
right.
did I feel
Strong
that?
karmic connection. You know, when you have a strong karmic connection with somebody, I mean, you know, people can have that experience whether they're alive or dead. You can know there's some terrible problem for your mother 1,000 miles away. That's because of the strong karmic connection. You can be sensitive to their mind. That's not uncommon. Yes, that's a nice experience, isn't it?
Yes, it was very nice. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yes, Lorraine.
Okay, I figured out how to unmute. Okay, so there's a new burial practice I've heard of where they take your ashes and I guess you can plant a tree. They put your ashes in the tree root. And I was wondering what you think of that and what kind of implications that would have.
The main emphasis for Lama Zopa Rinpoche, taking the Tibetan Buddhist Vajrayana view, is that's very nice, but there's no blessing in that. It's very nice to do that, but before you do that, get the remains blessed. So the Buddha's literally, it turns the ashes into something holy. So it's a great benefit for the mind. So do that, then then do it in the tree. But just the tree itself is no benefit for the Buddhist view. It's got to be blessed by the presence of the Buddhas and blessed by these special practices. That's how they say.
Okay,
do you understand? Yes. Good, Lorraine. Thank you, darling. Yes, somebody else there who had their hand up. I saw another hand. I can't find it now.
Jane?
Yes, Jane. Hello, sweetheart.
Hi, Venerable. Thank you so
Hello.
much.
Hello,
My
sweetheart.
family and I, we're kind of animal caretakers. When we find an animal on the road, like a bird that's been hit and died, or a mouse that's been killed, we'll pick it up and we'll pray and we'll bury it. Is that sufficient to
That's
honor
amazing.
that animal?
Already
Or
amazing.
is there
Yes,
more we
fantastic,
should
darling.
do?
No, that's incredible. I mean, that's amazing to do that. You bless the creature right there. Perfect, sweetheart.
Is
Nothing
there
wrong
a
with that.
certain mantra that would be better?
Well, I mean,
Or-
Lama Zopa's got so many variations in his book. So any mantra you know is perfect, sweetheart.
Okay.
I mean, Rinpoche is very precise and he drills down. Some mantras are better for this and for that. But any mantra would be perfect, sweetheart. Any mantra.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful, Jane. Wonderful. Yes. Anybody else? Yes. Somebody else? No, nobody else. Okay. Yes. No, nobody else. Okay. All right. So then, so the whole business of impermanence every day, remembering it, which is really the major way to live your life, then death won't be fearful. And then, the one about aspiring to go to Pure Land, or aspiring, strongly wanting, every day thinking this way, make it, that's a way to make death very real for you. Not just, I'm going to die one day, but what rebirth do I want? It's so important. The karma takes care, for sure. But the more clearly you intend. So in Rinpoche's chapter about Amitabha's Pure Land, he says there are various causes. And the first one is wanting to go there. So hear this point. It's really logical. The first cause for getting an ice cream is I want an ice cream. Please hear the point. It's obvious. Then you follow. Wanting is not enough. You got to then do the steps to get it. But the first step, everything exists on the tip of the wish, as Rinpoche says, which is the meaning of the word karma, mental action, intention. I want, I will, may. It's the starting point. So powerful. So I want to be born a human being. I want to be born with a Buddhist family. I want to meet the Dharma again. I want to keep practicing. Clearly you say all that, and then you create the causes to get exactly that. What would that be? Live in vows. You're going to have lots of non-killing karma to get a human body. You got to connect to the Buddha and want to stay close to the Buddha, and your practices, so you put the karmic imprints in. It's practical, you know. It's practical. It's not superstition. Karma is a natural law for the Buddha. Okay, it's a hard one to hear this. It's a brand new idea to us because we always think someone else is kind of in charge of the process. Not for the Buddha. I think that's it. I have to finish soon. I exhaust myself. I'm so sorry. I think enough. We've done everything. We've been through the 8 stages. We've talked about impermanence. We've got more to talk about. We'll just do this tomorrow. Definitely do tomorrow. We've got more tomorrow, haven't we, Anna? Venerable.
Yep.
Okay, good. I think it'll do us today, unless you have any urgent more questions. It'll do. I think it's good enough food for thought, everybody. So, juncture, we delight we've done this. Think about all the meaning. Try and apply all this. I recommend Lama Zopa's book. It's one of the most practical books you can find, okay? So full of information, practical. And then do our best to recognize we're going to die. Every time you go to sleep, you think one day closer to death. And then, you know, and then when you wake up, delight you're not dead yet. I mean, really, it's the most first thought to have. Amazing. I haven't died yet. I mean, we're just not surprised by it now because we take ourselves for granted. But don't do that. Remind every day. Think about every day. And then think the reason to get the wake-up call is so I don't waste this precious life. I don't waste this opportunity. This is the result. I mean, Lama Zopa says if we could just really remember the amount of virtuous karma we created just to have this perfect human rebirth, it would blow our minds. So don't take it for granted. Don't just have the hubris of, oh, aren't I lucky? You're not lucky. You worked really hard. So keep working hard and create as little obstacles as you can between here and the next life. And it will all work beautifully, you know. Have that confidence. Jangtrub Semtrub Rinpoche, Ma Ke Panam Ke Guchi Ke Panyampa, Mepa Yang, Gongne, Gondu, Pelvashog. And maybe that's it. That's all. That's enough, people. Thank you, precious ones. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Venerable. Thank you, everybody. See you all tomorrow. All being well.